All right, guys, I'm going to get started here. Appreciate you coming down. I'm going to be talking a little bit about sport fishing in Lake Erie, and I'm not talking about walleye. So I know that's what we typically think about when we think about Lake Erie, but a huge growing dynamic is catch and release sport fishing on the lake. So this is going to be primarily smallmouth bass, white bass, and even some drum fishing. So my name is Josh McQueen. I own Fish Ohio Outfitters. We are primarily a guide service that does trophy trips all across Northeast Ohio. So in addition to what I'm going to be talking about today with Lake Erie, I run a lot of steelhead trips in the spring and fall, and I run some inland trips for trophy pike and smallmouth in the inland rivers as well. So I run on Lake Erie, I run a smaller boat. It's not a big walleye charter. It's a 19-foot Lund Alaskan, full windshield boat. Plenty of flat floor room to cast and drift fish out of. So my primary biggest target, I would say, for the trips is the big smallmouth bass. These are the big 5, 6, 7-pound fish that are awesome to catch. They fight hard, they jump a lot, and they're just super, super exciting fish to fish for. And what we do a lot with those is a lot of drift fishing. It's sort of similar to drift fishing for walleye. We're using a lot of Ned rigs, and we use a lot of bottom stuff. I am targeting primarily like giant rock piles, contour lines, things like that. And then, of course, by the season, kind of dictates, of course, where I'm going to be. So I'll kind of start from the beginning and talk about where my season starts. So coming up after steelhead season in the spring, sometime in around mid-late April, there's going to be fish pushing into the river mouths that are getting ready to spawn, and they're also entering the harbors. This is a great time to catch some of the biggest fish of the year, because the females are pre-spawn, so they still have all their eggs, so they're super fat, big fish. And a lot of those fish are really looking to gorge before they head into the beds. So it can be a lot of action if you can find them. It's one of the few times of the year that you can get a lot of those fish on twitch baits, soft jerk baits. They're not all that deep. They might be in 15, 20 foot of water just outside of a harbor wall, but they're in the top 4 or 5 feet of the water column. So they're riding high, and what they're doing up there is they're looking for bait fish, emerald shiners, and shad and stuff that they can get into and feed heavily on before they make the spawning runs that they're going to make. So like I said, there's a certain number of fish that are going to go up into those rivers, and there's a certain number of fish that are going to stay out in the harbors. And so that's the one time a year that I can really fish super shallow. Right before they start to make the beds, they're going to be in about 10 foot of water or less all along the break walls, river mouths, harbors. And again, they're just in there really feeding. The spawn, I don't mess around with the spawning fish too much. We sort of jump over that. There's enough pre-spawn and post-spawn fish on either side of the spawn that I can target those without having to target the fish that are on the beds. So by the time I get to post-spawn, those fish they heat back up pretty quickly as well, and they really again start feeding on shiners, and as they move out into the lake deeper, they're really starting to look for a lot of gobies and crawls on the bottom. And the easiest way to find those fish once they enter that post-spawn mode is just to sort of start in the shallows and work out. And again, I'm looking at contour lines. So on my graph, on my depth finder, I'm usually running a split screen, and I'll run the sonar, but I'll also run my chart. And I look at my chart for where those drop-offs are, where those rock piles meet sort of the sand or gravel areas. I use that just as much as I use the sonar itself. And sometimes it takes a little bit to find, where those bass are holding, but once you find them, you're typically going to find a lot of them. There's going to be a lot of them there. And again, the method is with the artificial baits. It's a lot of Ned rigs or tubes at that point. So the Ned rig, if you don't know what that is, a lot of people do. It's a very popular bait now. And that is a basic, it's usually either a flat top or rounded top jig head I carry these in a variety of weights, everything from 1/16 ounce all the way up to 5/8 or so of an ounce, or some of the, I got a few that are 3/4, but that's super, super heavy. And I carry a variety of tails that go on these. My favorites are a lot of the dark colored or brown colored or green colored stuff. So this little guy is actually a black with some red flake in it. And so you're gonna have a couple of options depending on the day. And that's gonna vary depending on what the wind is doing and where those fish are at. So if I've got a decent wind, not too much, that's enough to make big waves, but a decent wind, maybe 10, 15 knots, it's the right direction. I can try to get a half a mile an hour to about a mile or a little over a mile an hour drift. And I prefer a rod just like this. This is one of the rods that stays on my boat. It's a 7.5 foot light action rod, and that's just 6-pound copolymer line on there. It's very sensitive. What's up with that? Very sensitive, very flexible. And the idea behind using a rod this light is, as I'm dragging through that bottom, I can teach you pretty quickly if you're on my boat how to sort of feel what you're trying to feel, how to feel the rocks that you're sticking to. And a lot of the bottom is very broken up there. There's gravel, there's bigger chunks of limestone rock and various types of substrate. And I want that bait to sort of drag through there. And if I've got a decent amount of wind, honestly, I don't have to give it that much action. I can really just let the drift do the work. And it's sort of a rise and fall technique. And again, if the waves are big enough, it's lifting that rod up and down on its own as you're holding on to it, and that sort of gives it that up and down action. Now, if I don't have any wind, I've got to cast out. Is that mine, Micah? So is that over there? Okay. So if I don't have any wind, then I'm going to have to do a lot more of moving that bait myself. And obviously, as with most fishing situations, the colder that water temperature is, the slower I'm going to want to try to work that bait. As that water warms up, I can move that bait a lot faster through those rocks and around those contours. One of the biggest things is wind direction. In my boat, what I'm going to do is look at my chart, and if I have, let's say I've got a southwest wind, and I'm looking at my chart, and I have a contour line that comes down and then jets over this way and goes way out. If that wind is going like this, I'm going to set myself up to where I can cover the majority of that contour line my boat up with that. And of course, I'm running tracks on my graph, so I can see where I went, and then I'll just make adjustments with each drift as I go. And I'm trying all those different depths to sort of find out where they want to hang out. Now, seasonally, water temperature is going to dictate where those fish are as far as depth goes. A lot of that actually has to do with where the food is, not so much where the fish wants to be. So where do those gobies and those crayfish, where are they hanging out? And then that's where the fish are going to go. And then, so again, water temperature seasonally makes up for part of that. Also, it could be a clarity or light situation. So if I'm fishing like, say, shoals or reefs around the islands, I'm probably going to start out in sometimes as shallow as 6 or 10 foot of water near an island in the morning, and then I'll probably move out into 20 or 30 foot of water as the day goes on. That would be a situation if that water was particularly clear. If that water was really clear. If that water's a little bit more muddy from some recent wind, or maybe a lot of rain has pushed mud into the rivers, and around the river mouths there's a lot of mud, then I'll probably be able to stay a little bit shallower where those fish are at, because they're not going to be out in 30 foot of water if the water's really dirty. So again, this is pretty basic. The Ned rig, I just let them go straight down to the bottom, and that bait is going to drift along with the flow of the lake. And again, it's going to have sort of a rise and fall action from the waves if I have the wind. And I'm trying to feel through the rod every little bit of when that Ned rig is being drugged down. And then of course, if I feel a slow, gradual pull, that's probably going to be the bottom. You can very easily, with a rod this sensitive, tell when you have a fish like that little guy right there biting on that Ned rig. And then actually, as you go on, you're going to let go of that, buddy. There you go. You're gonna be able to actually even tell, if you spend some time with me, what fish is biting. So the smallmouth have sort of a vacuum feel. It's very quick, and when the water's warm, they're even faster at it. And so you gotta be pretty quick. You gotta give them kind of that second to suck it in, and then just a nice, doesn't have to be a big follow through like a Bill Dance style hook set. It's just gotta be a good pop. And then the first thing those smallmouth are gonna do is rock it right towards the top. Where I have a lot of folks struggle to keep the fish on the line, if we're out in 20+ foot of water, that fish is coming straight up towards the boat and they don't reel down fast enough to keep the pressure. So a lot of times the guy's like, oh man, do I still have it? And you look out, there's a fish jumping, throwing their bait because they didn't reel down fast enough to catch up to that fish. Then the drum are opposite of that. The drum make a big pound, it's a big hit, and then they just dive. They just bulldog on it. So you're gonna actually learn to feel the difference between what fish are biting. And you know, the drum, a lot of you probably know them as sheephead. They've actually become quite a popular sport fish too. The walleye guys, you know, over the years, they sort of scoff them and stuff because they're bait thieves and they're trash fish and they don't eat well. But for the fella that just really wants to get a big tug on the rod and have a good time, they're a pretty darn awesome fish to catch because they really just fight. I mean, man, they just fight, they pull. There's a lot of them. They give a ton of action. And did that fish really carry that all the way? It did, didn't it? Carried it all the way over here. So that's kind of the Ned rig will just kind of get you into both of those. Now, another fish that I chase up commonly are the white bass. And the white bass, they're in big schools. One of the easiest ways to find them is you'll see the birds, you'll see the seagulls diving down in an area repetitively. They're probably working on a school white bass that's right under the surface busting shiners. And so the seagulls are trying to capitalize off of that. And they're trying to steal the injured or dead shiners away from the white bass. So the seagulls will kind of give up their position. Those are actually a pretty fun fish to catch. They're actually not a bad eating fish if you catch them in a little cooler water temperature when their meat's a little bit more firm, and they can really keep you busy. You can do a lot of, and it's subsurface, so you kind of see the action. I throw a lot of like just ball head jigs, 1/8 or 1/4 ounce jigs. Because I can usually get pretty close to them. You don't have to really make a big long cast, maybe from here to the wall. And I just sort of rip that jig back and bounce it. And sometimes you'll get to see 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 white bass all converging on that jig. It's a lot of action and it's really, really exciting. So those are kind of the 3 primary targets. We get a lot of other bycatches. We get largemouth, we get channel catfish. There's just a lot of cool stuff in there that you can catch while you're fishing for some of these primary targets. So as the smallmouth season progresses on and they go deep and the drum are deep in the summer, the next kind of season that I look forward to once that's wrapping up is whenever we start to turn the corner and go into fall season, now we're starting to cool off. Smallmouth will come back in the shallows again, but they're not there to spawn, they're more just there to feed. You'll start getting the big groups in like sort of early mid-October of shiners and shad coming together all along the breakwalls and the harbors and around certain points of the islands. And those smallmouth are moving there, to feed on those groups of bait. So then lastly, but certainly not leastly, one of the cool things we do is we actually go out to the harbors along the breakwalls and we fish for steelhead there. So there's going to be a lot of steelhead trout that are going to come in around those harbors and walls. And we can either take the light action rods and fish with spoons, jigs, and stuff right under the surface or a little down and catch steelhead. Or if maybe we're struggling a little bit to find a lot of them in one area, we also troll spoons and crankbaits and catch a lot of steelhead that way. They're very, very exciting. I love catching them in the river, but I also love in the harbor because they're all fresh. They're all super chrome fish, and they jump a lot. They have a ton of room, open space to run, and they really fight hard. So those are great fish to catch. So another method that I've been guiding fly fishing trips for a lot of years, and we actually do a lot of fly fishing on Lake Erie. And traditional fly fishing, was centered around trout. It began with a lot of trout fishing. And a fly rod is designed with a tapered, heavier sort of line to carry a lighter bait a farther distance. And that line just tapers down into the leader, and the leader tapers down and goes to the fly. And that would be a floating fly line. That would be standard fly fishing equipment. That standard floating fly line works with the harbor steelhead, but the other species, the smallmouth and the drum and even some of the white bass, that floating fly line just doesn't sink the bait, doesn't sink the presentation enough to get it down. So as fly fishing has developed over the last several years, they've developed sinking lines. This is a sink tip fly line. So coming off of the leader here, the black portion of the fly line is actually a sinking line, and then this green portion is a floating running line. And they make a variety of these that cover different depths, and they have different sink rates. So this one sinks at 6 inches per second. And the reason that this is important is most of these flies are made out of lightweight materials. This one particularly is a bucktail. This particular fly is called a streamer. And streamers are flies that are made to imitate bait fish. So this is made out of a lot of bucktail. There's a little bit of flash in there. And you guys won't quite be able to see this, but if I just lay this on the water, it's just gonna float. The fly itself is just gonna float. So the sinking line is actually what's gonna make the bait sink, not the fly itself. And so this sinking line pulls that fly down to where the fish are at. And what's amazing about the fly fishing aspect is I can control this at a variety of depths a lot easier than I can control a sinking bait. So when I get good at casting this, I can cast this thing 60, 70, 80, 90 feet, but then I can also control where I want this fly, this bait, this presentation to be. And so you will be able to see it in the tank. And it'll start to slowly go down behind that sinking line. You'll see the sinking line go down first, and then as I pull on it, that fly is gonna trail it, and it's gonna follow that sinking line down and get it down into the strike zone. And you can see a number of those bass are pretty interested in that guy. And you can see how as I came back, that fly comes up, because now I don't have any or very little sinking line in the water. So this allows me to cover the water column from a U shape. So all the way through the cast, at the beginning I cover different depths till I get down to the bottom. I'm working through wherever I let it sink at. And again, it's 6 inches per second. So I can kind of count that down in my mind and then bring it through the column of the water I want to bring it through. And then it gets to come back up and cover more various depths again as I approach the boat. And again, it's counting it down to where I want it to be. Now the hog trough's a little shallow, so I can't give you a great example of what it's like to get to 20 feet, but you can imagine if I count to about 30 or 35, I can get about 3/4 or 4/5 the way down. Work that water column steady. You can see that fly's kind of staying at the same depth. And as I approach the boat, if I wasn't getting ate so much, then that fly comes back up and works a different part of the water column. And so it is incredibly effective because with the spin gear, and I love using the spin gear too, but with the spin gear, I'm really just able to target the bottom. And I'm not even able to get a great presentation coming up as I approach the boat because that's a straight up and down presentation. This is gonna fish more on the curve and allow me to fish every bit of the water column as I come through the cast. So we use this a lot for the smallmouth, for the steelhead, for the white bass, the fly fishing. And actually, for years it's been popular saltwater fishing for red drum, black drum, the redfish in our Louisiana, Florida permit. In Florida they have bonefish. Well, a lot of those saltwater guides and anglers, they're able to see fish, and that's very exciting. You can see them and cast to them and watch them eat that fly. Well, a few years ago, I started working on developing fishing with crayfish imitations, and dabbling around with the floating lines or the slowly sinking lines. And I can actually go around like Kelly's Island or South Bass Island where there's some flat, shallow water and actually see smallmouth and drum that I can sight cast to and actually coax them with that fly and watch them eat that fly. So the fly fishing is very exciting from that standpoint too. So we do both. I honestly am kind of more in love with the fly fishing. I think some of you just got a good example of why that would be a lot of fun. And, you know, yeah, I know it's an aquarium, it's a hog trough, but you can see those fish were a little bit more excited about this than they were even the Ned rig. And it's just because it just fishes so well in such a controlled way coming through that water column. One of the things that I'll say too about this inshore fishing stuff is the program is just, it's a lot of fun. We see a lot more scenery. We just don't go way offshore. I'm usually along the shorelines, in and around the rocks, the island edges. One of my favorite programs is fishing just around Kelly's Island in the summertime because, you know, we go out and we fish in the morning and then I just dock up at the marina in the south side of Kelly's Island and we eat lunch right on the water and then we can go back out and fish. So it's just a nice little program. So these trips have become a lot more popular over the last couple of years. You know, it's awesome to catch fish to take home and fry, but it's also fun to go out and just catch some fish that jump, that fight hard, and that's what this is all about. So I appreciate you guys coming out. If you have any questions, I'm going to get down off of here first. And then if you guys want to come over and ask me some questions, I'll appreciate it. I'll answer any questions you got. If you want to come see us, Fish Ohio Outfitters booth is located right across from where the food is, right by the main cafeteria down there in the other building. And again, guys, I appreciate you coming out.